what happens when one of Hollywood's most revered, soft-spoken actors finally loses his composure on live television. What unfolded yesterday morning on Good Morning America will be etched into the annals of daytime TV history as one of its most jarring moments. Keanu Reeves, known the world over for his calm presence, philosophical depth, and quiet generosity, found himself in an escalating verbal confrontation with host George Stephanopoulos. And by the end of it, the studio was silent, stunned by a clash that veered far from any typical morning show interview. Before we dive into what led to this extraordinary moment, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what you think finally pushed Keanu too far. The day started like any other. Keanu arrived on set in classic form, understated, warm, approachable. Clad in a black jacket and jeans, he greeted the crew with handshakes and sincere interest in their lives. He was there to promote his upcoming passion project, a film centered on motorcycle culture, brotherhood, and the freedom of the open road. But from the moment the cameras rolled, it became clear George had other plans. Rather than asking about the film, the creative process, or Keanu's storied career, George opened with an edgy, "Keanu, let's talk about what our viewers really want to know. There's been a lot of speculation about your personal life, your relationships, and frankly, whether the nice guy image you present is just a long-running act." The question landed like a punch. Keanu's expression didn't change much, but those who knew him might have noticed the slight shift in his eyes. A flicker of surprise, perhaps disappointment. "Still," he responded calmly, "I appreciate the opportunity to be here, George. But I was under the impression we were going to talk about the film. It's a project that matters deeply to me. I think your audience would find it meaningful." But George kept pushing. He leaned in. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? The constant deflection, the curated mystery. Don't you think the public deserves to know the real Keanu Reeves?" There was an audible shift in the studio. Camera operators paused. Crew members exchanged glances. The temperature dropped a few degrees. Keanu remained composed but firmer now. "I'm not deflecting. I'm here to talk about my work. The work we agreed to discuss. If you want a conversation about authenticity and public image, I'm happy to have it. But let's do it with respect." George chuckled, a sound that wasn't so much amused as derisive. "Respect. Is that what you call it when you've made a career playing the same brooding archetype? Saying the same intense lines, disappearing until the next gig? Where's the challenge in that? Where's the growth?" That's when Keanu's expression changed again. The famous patience. It cracked, just slightly. His voice remained calm, but the weight behind it shifted. "I've been acting for over 3 decades, George. I've worked with legends. I've chosen roles that scared me, that forced me to confront parts of myself I didn't even know existed. Reducing all of that to some lazy stereotype, that's not only inaccurate, it's insulting." But George wasn't finished. "And yet, here you are again, playing another stoic guy on a motorcycle, speaking in philosophical riddles. Isn't that exactly the kind of typecasting you claim to avoid?" For a moment, Keanu just looked at him, and then, unexpectedly, he smiled. But this wasn't his usual soft, genuine grin. This one had an edge. "You know what, George? You're right. I do have a type. Characters who believe in something bigger than themselves, who try to help people, who understand that strength isn't about dominating others or tearing people down just to feel powerful. If that's typecasting, I'm okay with that." The blow didn't land the way George had hoped, so he pivoted, harder. "Let's talk about your last film." There were reports of conflict with the director, crew members feeling intimidated. Allegations you used your influence to get your way. The accusation was severe, and from everything known about Keanu's decades-long reputation, utterly baseless. The air thickened. Keanu's features shifted, confusion giving way to realization, then to something colder. His posture straightened, his eyes focused. I'm going to stop you right there. Those accusations are false. And frankly, they're defamatory. I've worked in this business long enough to recognize a setup when I see one. I won't sit here and let you create controversy where none exists. George leaned forward, clearly enjoying that he'd finally gotten a rise. So you're saying there's no truth to the rumors? That there were no heated exchanges? That no crew members ever felt uncomfortable around you? Keanu didn't flinch. I've had passionate creative discussions on every set I've worked on. That's the collaborative process. But intimidating crew members, power plays, that's fiction, George. And you know it. George smelled blood. Even if there wasn't any, he pressed again. But isn't it interesting that these kinds of stories keep following you? The drama, the behind-the-scenes tension, the things the studio has to clean up. Keanu leaned in, his voice low, measured, but unmistakably dangerous. No, George. What's interesting is that you chose to ignore an entire body of work, decades of professionalism, and a chance for meaningful conversation, just to play armchair psychologist and try to provoke me on live TV. And with that, Keanu stood up. I don't need to be part of this. He removed his microphone calmly, deliberately, not in anger, but with finality. He set it down on the desk with quiet precision. You had a chance today to talk about something real, something human. Instead, you revealed exactly who you are. I hope that was worth it. And just like that, Keanu Reeves walked off set, leaving George Stephanopoulos alone in his chair, staring into the camera with the look of a man who just realized he'd set fire to his own reputation. The silence that followed stretched on awkwardly before a frazzled producer finally cut to commercial. But it was too late. Millions had just watched one of Hollywood's most respected actors be ambushed on live TV and walk away with dignity, leaving a seasoned journalist scrambling to explain the ashes. Keanu's patience was wearing thin. His legendary composure, so often mistaken for passivity, was beginning to fracture under the weight of George's repeated insinuations. You keep tossing out these vague claims, problems, conflicts, issues, but not one specific incident. Because there aren't any. Keanu said, his tone edged with quiet frustration. George's smile turned sharp. All right, specifics then. Let's talk about the incident in Toronto, during an action sequence. You allegedly got physically aggressive with a stunt coordinator who disagreed with your approach. Sources say it got ugly. The claim landed like a punch in the gut. Absurd, inflammatory, and completely at odds with everything the industry knew about Keanu Reeves. A few people in the studio audibly gasped. Keanu looked stunned, not with guilt, but disbelief at the sheer audacity of the lie. That is completely false, he said flatly. But his voice had changed. It carried weight now. Steel. Not only did that never happen, you're describing behavior that goes against everything I've ever stood for. I've never been physically aggressive with anyone on any set. Ever. But George was just getting started. He was armed with a file full of fiction and a singular goal: provoke a reaction. What about your co-stars? We've heard you've become difficult. That the kindness is an act. That behind the scenes you're controlling, demanding. Which co-stars? Keanu cut in, his voice rising now. The cracks were showing. Name one. Just one who's ever said that. George waved a hand, dismissing the request as if facts were a nuisance. You know I can't reveal sources. But the industry talks, Keanu. And what they're saying isn't as flattering as your public image. The industry talks. Keanu echoed. There was something different in his voice now. A stillness. A warning. You want to know what they actually say? They say I show up on time. I know people's names. I treat everyone, with respect. I don't throw tantrums. I don't pull rank. I make sure craft services has vegan options because someone on set once mentioned they were trying it. That's what they say. His words were no longer just a defense. They were a statement of identity. Decades of integrity condensed into one rising, unwavering voice. They say I make the set feel safe. Collaborative. That I've never used my name to make someone else's life harder. That's what the industry actually says. George's smirk flickered, but he still pushed. You have to admit, it all sounds too perfect. No bad days, no outbursts. Come on. That level of control, it feels calculated. A strategy, PR. You're selling a product, Keanu. And I don't buy it. The accusation was cruel in its simplicity. Not just a challenge to Keanu's actions, but a denial of who he was. A dismissal of every moment of quiet decency that had defined him for 30 years. The room went still. Even the crew stopped moving. Keanu leaned back. For a second, it looked like he might retreat to safety. Say something graceful and move on. But then, he straightened. And when he spoke, the voice was quiet but absolute. George, I've been patient. Because I try to assume good intentions. I figured maybe you were under pressure to stir things up. Maybe you were just having a bad day. He leaned in slightly, his gaze sharpened. But this isn't journalism. This isn't storytelling. And it sure as hell isn't professional. You're not asking questions. You're throwing mud and praying something sticks. Each word landed with clinical precision. The smirk was gone now. George looked unsure, rattled. You're sitting there making accusations with nothing to back them up. No evidence, no names, no truth. And yet somehow, you expect me to take this seriously. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, charged. Keanu wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. He had something far more powerful, credibility. And now, the room knew exactly who was still holding on to theirs. Keanu leaned forward. Voice steady but rising with righteous fire. Not anger, but the resolve of someone who'd been patient for too long, spreading rumors you either made up or accepted without verifying. Attacking not just my work, but my character, my integrity, my values as a human being. He paused just long enough for the words to land. And the most insulting part, you do it under the guise of being some kind of truth teller, some brave journalist asking the hard questions. George tried to cut in. Keanu, I think you're overreacting. These are just standard interview questions. But Keanu wasn't finished. Standard. His voice was low, incredulous. You've spent 15 minutes trying to dismantle everything I've built, based on gossip and innuendo. You've made accusations, serious ones, without a shred of evidence. You've questioned my integrity, my authenticity, my basic decency. The studio was silent now. Even the air conditioning seemed to hush. George gave a nervous laugh and a wave of the hand. See, this is what I mean. The moment someone challenges your carefully managed image, you get defensive. You lecture about values. Doesn't that just prove how calculated all of this is? The dismissal was so tone-deaf that even the crew exchanged uneasy glances. But for Keanu, it was the breaking point. He stood slowly, controlled. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but absolute. George listened closely. I'm only going to say this once. His eyes locked on the host, who suddenly looked much smaller than before. You just proved everything wrong with this style of journalism. With this mindset. You asked me here under the pretense of discussing my work, my art, the thing I've given my life to. Instead, you've tried to tear me down with rumors you won't name and sources you can't cite. George tried to speak. Wait a minute, Keanu. But Keanu talked right through him. And then, when I defend myself, when I stand up for who I am, you twist that into evidence that I'm fake, that I'm hiding something. That's not journalism. That's character assassination with a press pass. He began removing his microphone, methodically. You want to talk about what's calculated? This interview was calculated. You came in looking for an ambush, hoping to provoke me into giving you a headline. George looked flustered now, his confidence unraveling. Keanu, come on. These are legitimate questions about a public figure. Keanu stopped, microphone halfway off. Legitimate questions. His tone was half disbelief, half pity. You accused me of intimidating crews, of being manipulative and fake. You suggested my career was built on lies. That's not a question, George. That's an accusation. He finished removing the mic and set it on the table with a soft, final click. And when I asked for evidence, any evidence, you offered nothing. Just whispers. Hearsay, that's not news. As gossip dressed up in a suit, he stood tall, fully composed. And the saddest part, I came here genuinely excited to talk about this film. About the team, the work, the story we're proud to tell. Instead, I've spent 20 minutes defending decency against someone who thinks kindness must be an act and professionalism must be a lie. George reached for one last lifeline. Keanu, you have to understand. The public deserves to know who they're really admiring. They deserve to see what's behind the image. Keanu gave a slow, sad smile. You're right. The public does deserve the truth, and they deserve better than manufactured controversy sold as transparency. He turned and walked off the set, leaving George speechless, and the rest of the room in stunned silence. The public has a right to know, Keanu said, slipping on his jacket with the same calm, deliberate grace he'd maintained throughout the interview. When a so-called journalist is more interested in manufacturing drama than pursuing truth. He adjusted the collar and looked directly at George. And they have a right to know when someone chooses to walk away from something toxic, rather than stay and legitimize it. George blinked. For the first time, his voice wavered. You're just gonna leave? Yes. Keanu's voice was firm but not angry, just done. Because continuing this conversation would be a disservice, to both of us and to everyone watching. He paused, then added with piercing clarity. You've made it clear you're not here for an honest dialogue about my work or my life. You came here to provoke, to tear down, to generate clicks, not to understand, not to ask questions, to score points. Now standing fully composed, jacket buttoned, Keanu looked every bit the man who had spent decades earning his reputation and had no intention of letting it be stolen in 20 minutes of television. I've spent my entire career trying to tell stories that matter, he continued. I've worked with people who value integrity, who treat others with respect, on set and off. I'm not going to sit here and let you twist that into something ugly, just because conflict sells better than character. George tried one last jab. So this is how Keanu Reeves handles tough questions. He walks away. Keanu stopped at the edge of the set, turned and looked back, not with anger, but something far more unsettling, total certainty. No, George. These weren't tough questions. His voice lowered, sharpened with precision. Tough would have been asking about the challenge of shooting motorcycle sequences at night, about building emotional stakes in a genre film, about how I've evolved over 30 years in this craft. That would have shown curiosity. Respect. He stepped closer to the edge of the light. What you did today wasn't journalism. It was an ambush based on cynical assumptions and clickbait rumors. That's not tough. That's just cruel. And with that, Keanu turned and walked off set. The studio fell into stunned silence. Cameras kept rolling for a few moments longer. The only sound was the soft click of the studio door closing behind him. Behind a man who had just reminded everyone watching that dignity still has a place in entertainment. George sat alone, smaller now than he had seemed at the start. Around him, the crew looked unsure of what to do, whether to cut or clap or just absorb what had happened. The entire confrontation lasted under 25 minutes, but it would be talked about for years, not as a scandal, not as a meltdown, but as the moment Hollywood's most respected actor finally said, "Enough." What did you think of Keanu's powerful exit? Was he right to walk away? Or should he have stayed and pushed back harder? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable moments from the world of entertainment. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is get up and leave.